Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. So here's something we've been wondering about avidly. Why would one of the most famous news organizations in the world work so hard to kill one of the biggest news stories of the year? Of the many questions now emerging in the Harvey Weinstein scandal, that may be the greatest of all the mysteries. NBC News had this story months ago, brought to them by their former anchor, Ronan Farrow. The company not only turned the story down, they actively tried to suppress it. Farrow was barred from using an NBC crew to interview a Weinstein accuser on camera. That's the holy grail of a TV story. NBC News president Noah Oppenheim repeatedly intervened to keep that story off the air. Now, news outlets don't typically act that way, just the opposite, because, of course, their job is to bring the news to the public, not hide the news. What happened in this case? Well, NBC News president Noah Oppenheim may be the key to that question. Oppenheim doesn't just oversee NBC News, he's also a screenwriter who's written several films, apparently profiting from his work in Hollywood, even as he runs the network's news division. Screenwriters, of course, are dependent on film producers, of whom Harvey Weinstein was perhaps the most powerful of all. The conflict there is obvious. Did it affect how NBC treated this story? Lloyd Grove is editor-at-large for the Daily Beast. He's been closely covering NBC's role in the Weinstein scandal, and he joins us tonight. Lloyd, that is such an obvious conflict, it seems to me, and nothing personal against Noah Oppenheim. I mean, I'm impressed that he's a screenwriter on the side, but how can you do both? How can you oversee a news division and have a foot in Hollywood and fairly cover a story about the most famous person in Hollywood? How would that work?
Not very well, obviously, because NBC clearly messed up, and they're justifiably taking hits for that decision-making process. But all the questions you asked in your lead-in are still out there. Clearly, NBC messed up, but we don't really know the answer why and what the decision-making was. I mean, the decision-making got up to the level of Steve Burke's office. He's the CEO of NBC Universal. And obviously, they have a lot of Hollywood and entertainment properties. And obviously, they've done business with the Weinstein Company and with Harvey Weinstein. So I think that's the big question. And
here's what we do know for sure. We know that Noah Oppenheim lied when he said to NBC staff a couple of days ago that the story just wasn't adequate. He didn't have it. We know that Ronan Farrow asked for a camera crew to interview on camera an accuser. I mean, that's the essence of a television story. So clearly, maybe the story wasn't ready for air that day, but clearly he was moving toward a blockbuster. So it's ludicrous to say he just didn't have it.
Well, that was my understanding, that that particular person that Ronan Farrow was going to interview was not going to be identified. That person was going to be in silhouette. But my sources at NBC told me that Ronan Farrow did have 3 women on camera, one of whom, Rose McGowan, the actress, withdrew after a while because she was all legaled up and was going to probably sustain some consequences for going on camera. But I heard there was one other woman who was going to go on camera and one other woman who was not going to go on camera but allow her name to be used in the NBC report. And I understand that at least 2 of those women ended up in Ronan Farrow's New Yorker piece.
So, I mean, you're verifying what we've suspected and what we've also reported, which is that NBC didn't simply pass on the piece. They actively tried to suppress it. So I don't understand how there can be no repercussions within NBC. How can Noah Oppenheim continue to run the news division? How can Steve Burke continue to run the company if it seems clear they're implicated in the cover-up?
Well, with great respect and admiration for you, Tucker, I'm not sure I can go as far as you have gone.
Well, what's the alternative theory then? What would be a legitimate explanation for what they did?
Well, you know, historically, television news divisions are cautious and wary about getting out front of stories. I mean, traditionally, they like to see it first in the New York Times before doing. I mean, this has been going on for decades. And then, additionally, this whole issue of sexual misconduct, that makes a lot of the male executives in television very, very, what's the word, squirrely.
Well, I can see why, but they showed no such restraint when they leaked the Access Hollywood tape to the Washington Post. But I guess I mean, here's what's baffling to me.
But that was a tape. That was, I mean, that was.
Well, here you had tape. You had tape of women saying I was abused and/or raped by Harvey Weinstein, and NBC said no, you can't use our cameras to record those interviews. That's suppressing the story.
Well, no.
I don't know what else you call that.
There was just factually, there was one interview toward the end of Ronan Farrow's reporting that NBC pulled the plug on, and had to.
That's what I just said. Exactly. That's right.
But you said interviews. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Interview.
Okay.
But as you noted, they already had done.
They had 8 women. I understand they had 8 women who were going to, on camera, some of them in silhouette, but 2 who were allowing their images and names to be used. Yeah.
Well, here's one thing we can agree on. The state of their explanation is ludicrous. It's Ronan Farrow's fault. He just didn't nail the story down. We didn't have enough to go on. It's journalism, don't you know? Can they stick with that?
No, I mean, I think it's a laughable explanation, and I think, Oppenheim's talk to his town meeting the other day didn't really pass the smell test, in my opinion.
Yeah. Lloyd Grove, thank you for your reporting on this. I hope you'll keep digging in.
I will.
Thank you. Chris Plante is a nationally syndicated radio show host and a keen observer of the media, having worked in television media for many years, and he joins us tonight. We haven't talked about this, but whatever happened to Lisa Bloom? She seemed to run at the first sound of gunfire. Here she was, this great defender of women. Of course, she's a feminist hero. Where is she now?
She's in the witness protection program. She's probably on a mega yacht somewhere in Indonesia because obviously she was humiliated. She came out and spoke for the women when Roger Ailes, when Bill O'Reilly were in the dock, and then when Harvey Weinstein, as he's now known, I think, was in the dock. She came to his defense to oppose the women, sort of the Hillary Clinton of the legal world, I guess.
And then she ran away.
She ran away.
It'd be interesting to have her on the show. I'd love to hear the state of her view on this now. So, but where's everyone else? Where are the late night hosts in this?
Well, Jimmy Kimmel and the rest. I mean, it's not just the news media. It is the broader mass media that has worked to essentially smooth things over for Harvey Weinstein in this case. I would suggest largely because of his association with the Democratic Party, and the news media and the mass media provide a protective cocoon for Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and Chuck Schumer and all the other Democrats that have cozied up to Harvey Weinstein over the years, because it's impossible to believe that none of these people knew about this open secret that everyone has known about in Hollywood for decades, and in some cases finding out more recently, like Jane Fonda admitting that she found out a year ago, but she stayed silent because, and now she's ashamed of herself, not for betraying her country in the Vietnam War, but for not revealing the Harvey Weinstein secrets. And look, they have all known about it. It's been an open thing for years and years. All these people, you remember what a few years ago at Penn State, Joe Paterno and Jerry Sandusky, it was discovered that Jerry Sandusky was doing terrible things. It was suggested that Joe Paterno had been made aware of it years earlier.
Yes.
And that he didn't come out and speak clearly and in a loud voice about what he had heard in the way of murmurs. And it was declared that he was just as guilty as Jerry Sandusky, that his silence was complicity, that he was to some extent responsible for the assaults that Jerry Sandusky committed after Joe Paterno learned it. They tore down the bronze statue of Joe Paterno at Penn State like he was Saddam Hussein. For the crime of silence. And now we hear a different set of circumstances, but the same fact pattern. And we hear that the people that are now speaking up after the fact, after we've all learned about it, are heroes. They're, look, Jane Fonda is still a hero of the revolution and a feminist hero after remaining silent about Harvey Weinstein for more than a year after finding out about it. And she's not a standalone here by any stretch of the imagination. We've got producers, the studio heads. They made jokes about it on 30 Rock. They made, years ago, they made jokes about it at the what's his name, at the Oscars, MacFarlane, at the Oscars making jokes about it. Everybody knew what this guy was up to for years and years and years. But because of his party affiliation, Joe Paterno, a well-known conservative friend of George H.W. Bush, they lynched him. They crucified him because he didn't speak up. Now, all these Hollywood people, we learned, didn't speak up in virtually identical circumstances, and they're heroes. They're literally being described
so
as
I
heroes.
think you've determined after 30 years in the news business that not all sex scandals are treated equally.
I think that there are no two stories that are treated equally, and it's pretty easy to predict how these stories are going to go when they break.
And you do with unfailing accuracy every day. Chris Plant, thank you.
Thanks.
More and more people coming out admitting they knew pretty much what Harvey Weinstein was up to and yet said nothing. Jane Fonda now says she's ashamed for not going public with what she knew before. Listen.
I found out about Harvey about a year ago, and I'm ashamed that I didn't say anything right then.
Why didn't you? You're so bold.
I was not that bold because I guess it hadn't happened to me, and so I didn't feel it was my place.
Why didn't you? You're so bold. You're such a good person. Ugh. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton wishes people would stop talking about Harvey Weinstein, a major donor to her, and go after President Trump instead. At the same time, though, she says countless allegations against her husband are just old news.
This kind of behavior cannot be tolerated anywhere, whether it's in entertainment, politics.
Well,
you know, after all, we have someone admitting to being a sexual assaulter in the Oval Office.
And yet in your book, the three women brought onto stage by Trump attacking your husband, and you kind of dismissed them. Was that the right thing to do? Are you sure about that?
More than kind of dismiss them. Tammy Bruce is undismissible. She's a radio show host, and she joins us tonight.
Hey,
Tammy, what do you? I mean, look, I don't. None of these. Hillary Clinton didn't sexually assault anybody. On the other hand, if you hold yourself up as a defender of all women, you probably ought to defend all women, shouldn't you?
Yeah, you should. And this is what's a real tragedy for me as a feminist. The feminist movement clearly has been a fraud all these decades. We have a moment in time where these women, Jane Fonda, Donna Karan, Hillary Clinton, Helen Mirren, Emma Thompson, women who hold themselves up as feminists, were in fact distracting everyone with attacks on Donald Trump. And you heard Hillary Clinton say an admitted sexual assaulter. That is a lie. He never did, because he is not. And to move that effort to try to distract people is part of the crime here, because while they're doing that and trying to smear a political opponent with a contrived dynamic, in ignoring the carnage in their own town, how many women, while Jane Fonda was silent as an example, and Hillary Clinton was going to parties with Harvey Weinstein, how many young women, how many more in that year were thrown into the Harvey Weinstein volcano?
Well,
These
exactly.
are the questions that they have to face. And Jane Fonda being ashamed is not enough. She made a decision. What was happening last year when her friend, I believe it was Rosanna Arquette, who told her, what was happening? Well, the campaign was happening. And being honest about what was happening would ruin the Democrat narrative. It would ruin their narrative about their political opponent. So somehow there was a decision that this was preferred, that this would be the distraction about a false distraction and claim by the Democrats. So as feminists and all of us, not only do these women who are established need to speak up in order to change this environment, which we all want changed, but their silence does in fact contribute to the continuation of this horror that's unfolding.
What I found so fascinating about that clip from the Hillary Clinton interview that we played was that she was being interviewed by an English reporter, by a Brit. Only a British reporter would have asked her as directly as he did. No American reporter ever would say, wait a second, what about these women who claimed your husband abused and raped them and you dismissed them as liars?
Great point.
Why doesn't anybody ever say that? It's such an obvious point.
Well, it's because there's a deference to her. I mean, she is the hero, and it's difficult. For me, this is difficult.
Yes.
For all of us, my generation, her generation, is the one that came, before us, was to set this table so that we could take our power and make lives that best suited us. And here they are in the moment of need in the 21st century, while they're here and can make an impact, betraying us. And that becomes more of the issue. Now, you saw it with Christiane Amanpour, also with Jane Fonda, being very gentle, whereas at least Fonda admitted it. And the fact is, that becomes part of the problem. And when it comes to the huge Democrat donor and fundraiser of Harvey Weinstein, it does go beyond him. And it's all been a fraud of making people look at a shiny object, at Donald Trump, when in fact everything they were complaining about was happening in their own home.
Yeah, in spades. Tammy Bruce, thank you for that summation.
Thanks, Tucker.
We've got more on Harvey Weinstein later in the show. The ex-mogul says he's gone into rehab to cure his sex addiction because really he's the victim here. He's suffering from a disease. How badly do you feel about that? We'll talk to a licensed therapist about it coming up. We'll also give you the latest on the Las Vegas massacre. So much we don't know. Could hotel security have prevented it? At least made it easier for cops to figure out what happened? Less surveillance in these casinos than you may have realized. Details after the break. The mystery at the heart of the Las Vegas shooting becomes more baffling, maybe more upsetting with every passing day. Today, Vegas police stood by their modified narrative of what happened at Mandalay Bay, even though the hotel itself disputes that timeline.
9:59 is important. It wasn't inaccurate when I provided it to you. The circumstances associated with it is inaccurate. Okay? I am very well aware of the MGM statement provided yesterday. I agree with their statement. We have determined that Mr. Campos had encountered the barricaded door adjacent to the suspect's door at approximately 21:59. When you culminate that timeline associated from the initial 21:59 to the 22:05 timeline that we're still stand by as the initial volley of fire, Mr. Campos received his wounds in close proximity to 22:05.
Meanwhile, the FBI says the motive for Stephen Paddock's rampage is still unknown. John Sheehan is a former Las Vegas Metro Police Sergeant. He's a SWAT officer, and he joins us tonight. John, thanks a lot for coming on.
You bet, Tucker. Good to be with you.
Still confused by the timeline, but more than that, I'm confused by why the timeline has changed, and in significant ways, not in ways that you'd think that any reporter would be able to verify quickly. Why is that, do you think?
Well, I think if you go back to the original statements just post-shooting, Tucker, it's important for any police administrator, anyone giving a statement, to say this is what we know at this time. And you got to remember that we were in the infancy stages of that investigation here in Vegas at that time. You've got to collate and pull in all those sources of information to create an overarching timeline of exactly what happened. Now, that's going to include CCTV from Mandalay Bay. It's going to include their radio traffic, which is digitally recorded. It's going to include handwritten and typed logs by their security officers. And as those bits of information come in, they're added into that timeline along with all the other witnesses, iPhones, wristwatches, and then you build that overarching timeline, and that's what takes, the extra time.
Well, they changed it after about a week. It also took them over a week to verify when he checked into the hotel. Again, that seems like something your average PI could do immediately. Why would that be hard?
I have no idea, and it could be he entered under an assumed name. It could be they only looked as far back as his last reservation and maybe should have gone back a little farther than that. It sounds like maybe he jumped rooms. That's even a little bit unclear at this point in time. That all goes to the shooter's methodology and maybe trying to confuse investigators and confuse hotel staff as to exactly where he was. That is all still up in the air right now as far as we know.
I'm sure you know a lot of people involved in the investigation, and I would never impugn their motives or character. I bet they're, getting 4 hours of sleep, working as hard as they possibly can. But from our perspective, just as Americans watching, it seems disorganized. It really does, at least in the way they're communicating.
Well, I think you've got a glitch in the communication where it should have been articulated maybe better when there was that 6-minute gap. And I thought Sheriff Lombardo did an excellent job today at trying to clarify that. Now, the point is over these last 48 hours, is that when the clarification came into effect, Tucker? We don't know that. If I were the investigator, I wouldn't have interviewed Mr. Campos just once. I would have interviewed him several times and maybe even done a walkthrough interview of him on the floor to say, you did this at this time, and then what happened, and where did you go, and then try to time it out. As the days go on and it maybe becomes a little more clear and he's not so worked up over the incident and the trauma is farther and farther back, those items might become a little clearer. That's a possibility too. So I think we have to kind of go with what the witness statement was and use that as a clarification point here.
All right. John, thanks for joining us tonight. Appreciate it.
Sure. You bet, Tucker.
One reason investigators are having trouble with the timeline, pinning it down precisely, is that while the Mandalay Bay Hotel has a lot of cameras watching the casino floor, it turns out there aren't many in the hallways and probably none in the hotel rooms. Is that part of the problem? Brian Claypool is a lawyer. He was also an eyewitness to the Vegas attack. He was physically there, and he joins us tonight. Brian, give us just a recap of where you were when this happened.
Yeah, Tucker, I was sitting in what's called the VIP section. It was the Neon Lounge. I was actually in the front row, so my seats were actually exposed to the shooter. Initially heard some sound like firecrackers. I looked up in the sky. I didn't see any lights or anything, so I got worried. I stared at Jason Aldean. He was singing. He kind of paused during his song. I got worried. I was staring right at him for a signal. Then I heard about 5 or 10 more pops. He runs off the stage. I immediately knew this is not good. And I jumped up and tried to exit, and then you heard the barrage of bullets just came. It was an onslaught of bullets.
Yeah, it's never fireworks, ever. So you have obviously more interest in this than the average person, since you were literally fired upon. Tell me if you can clarify this. There are reports today that Paddock was in a freight elevator at least once in the hotel. Is that true? Is it normal for guests to find their way into freight elevators? And why are there no cameras in freight elevators? I thought there were always cameras in elevators.
Yeah, Tucker, you're raising a great point. It's absolutely not protocol for casino owners to allow guests to use service freight elevators. Let me make one thing clear, too, because I'm a survivor. I'm going to be representing some people in a case against the Mandalay Bay. And I will tell you, Tucker, everybody across this country has a personal stake in getting to the truth of the matter here. Why don't we have any transparency from the Mandalay Bay and MGM? You made a great point a few minutes ago. Where's the surveillance video of Paddock in the service freight elevator? Why don't we take a look at that? What was he carrying, for example, in that freight elevator? Why weren't there cameras in the hallway? Again, this is Las Vegas, not Pittsburgh or Domain, Iowa. This is a town where a lot of things happen in hallways and elevators. So, and then you have the issue.
Well, wait, can I just answer your question? May I just answer your question? I mean, with respect, I think part of the reason they haven't released a video is because they're terrified of lawyers like you, because you're suing them and they don't want to release the video. Don't you think, honestly?
Yeah, but Tucker, if the truth of the matter is that Campos was shot upon just before Paddock starts shooting out to where I was sitting, if that information benefits the MGM, then why not release the digital record, the timestamp of that phone call that he makes down there? Why not, for example, release cell phone records? Why not, for example, here's another point. Why not release the dispatch? In other words, Mandalay Bay security gets the call from Campos. What does the Mandalay Bay do? That's going to be at the thrust of the lawsuit.
So really quick, right. No, those are all fair questions, but I just want to know if, as a factual matter, do you know if the hotel has given over all of its surveillance video to investigators?
That I don't know, but what we will do, well, I'm sure they had to. I'm sure the investigators come in. They've got to cooperate in the investigation and turn it over. We will send what's called a preservation of evidence letter, which means you better keep all of that video surveillance and all the audio dispatch for the litigation.
Right. Brian, thanks for joining us tonight.
You bet. Thanks for having me, Tucker.
Players are still protesting the national anthem at NFL games, and people who are unhappy about that are called bigots for some reason. Up next, we'll ask how respecting our nation's symbols became a racial issue when it's not inherently. Stay tuned. Protests during the national anthem continue in the National Football League. They've even made appearances at other levels of football and in other sports. The protests are supposedly over issues of racial injustice, yet the target isn't any alleged perpetrators of that injustice. Instead, the protesting players are targeting the flag of the United States and the anthem, symbols that exist to unite this country, not divide it. Why have racial politics been allowed to intrude upon, in fact, define this debate and sully symbols of American unity? Ethan Behrman is a radio host in California, and he joins us tonight. Ethan, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Tucker.
So, look, there are a couple different ways to debate this. I'm offended by people attacking our national symbols. I think it's divisive. But, you know, I wouldn't make it illegal. What I'm confused by is why this is a racial issue. I don't see it as inherently one, and it seems to make it even more divisive when people on the left describe this as, you know, anyone who's criticizing it is somehow criticizing an entire racial group. That doesn't seem true to me.
Well, it's a racial issue because it's racial oppression is what we're talking about. I don't even like the word race, but we're talking about ethnic oppression of black people in the United States that goes back for an extended period of time. I don't have to repeat the history for you. You're a well-educated man, Tucker.
Right.
So, but that's what they're bringing attention to is the ongoing systemic oppression, and they're using the platform given to them, and they're doing it in a way like many have throughout human history that might be offensive to some, but it's to draw the attention to the problem and get that focus from everybody.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's hard, leaving aside the efficacy, I mean, it's hard to believe this is going to bring any justice to anyone ever, improve the life of anyone. Will you at least concede it's a little weird coming from the NFL, which is 70% African American, and where the average salary is almost $2 million? This must be the least oppressed group of people in human history. I mean, you at least admit that, right?
Well, whether they specifically are oppressed or not, they are spokespeople, and they have the platform, and therefore they're using it. So their income aside, they have risen up. They are the ones who are able to speak for a community.
Okay, but and that, you know, I don't think that's a crazy. I disagree with you, but at least it makes a kind of logical sense. But that's not what you're hearing from a lot of people on the left. So yesterday, Jesse Jackson described Colin Kaepernick, who's like, you know, would be the richest person in most American counties, as a martyr. How can a martyr to what? How can someone as powerful, wealthy, and celebrated as Colin Kaepernick be a martyr?
Well, the martyr there is in his job. He has lost his job. He is much better than many other backup quarterbacks in the NFL, and no NFL owner will hire him right now, even though he's available. He's in great shape. He's a great quarterback because he has spoken up. This is actually throughout human history. I know.
Wait, so do you think? Wait, so you agree? Wait, hold on. I can't. I don't think I can bear to hear Colin Kaepernick or any professional athlete compared to a character out of the Bible. I mean, come on now, let's not go. That's too stupid. But are you saying you think that Colin Kaepernick is a martyr?
I think if you put it in context of his job, obviously he hasn't lost his life in the traditional definition of martyr, but if we apply it like we do with the English language to different circumstances and analogies, in this case, he has lost his job for speaking up against oppression, against black people through systemic means in this country. That is a form of a martyr.
I guess, I mean, how would you feel if you were an actual oppressed person in this country or another country of any race or ethnicity, and you heard, you know, affluent leftists describe Colin Kaepernick, who's clearly like totally unoppressed, but in any traditional sense, described as a martyr? Wouldn't you feel a little insulted?
Well, I mean, if I'm suffering on the street somewhere, being beaten by, you know, somebody for racial reasons because of who I am, because, you know, my skin color, I might look at that and go, but maybe I would also look at it and say, hey, he's speaking up. He's trying to help, of course, and he's lost his job for speaking up for me. I don't necessarily agree with you on that.
Just really quick, just because I think it'll be amusing. Can you describe in specific terms how Colin Kaepernick is helping the oppressed of the world, like specifically?
Well, he's not trying to help the oppressed of the world. That isn't what he came
I'm sorry,
out to
I thought that's
talk
what he
about.
was. I thought that's why he was a martyr.
No.
Okay. Do you think that Colin Kaepernick's actions have reduced police brutality in this country, or conceivably could reduce police brutality in this country?
I think it could conceivably, because we are talking about it, has brought attention to the issue, and there is a community of people who have suffered disproportionately for it, and we're talking about it. Maybe we can legislate some change by having the conversation.
All right. Someday Colin Kaepernick's going to be on the $20 bill. Hopefully I'll be gone by then. Ethan, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker. Always good to talk to you.
President Trump signaled today he's ready to abandon the Iran deal if it's not improved very soon. So what does that mean? What's the next move? Where will this lead us, if anywhere? We'll talk to a retired colonel who's thought a lot about it coming up. Plus, Harvey Weinstein, you may have heard, is in rehab, drinking Diet Coke and talking about himself. Is he there to fix his problems, or is it damage control with the benefit of room service? We'll talk to a psychotherapist about it coming up. President Obama's Iran deal seems to be on the brink of death. Today, President Trump announced his administration believes Iran is violating that deal. He says he'll cancel it outright if Congress doesn't strengthen it.
I am directing my administration to work closely with Congress and our allies to address the deal's many serious flaws so that the Iranian regime can never threaten the world with nuclear weapons. In the event we are not able to reach a solution working with Congress and our allies, then the agreement will be terminated.
Doug McGregor is a retired colonel. He's now executive vice president at Burke McGregor Group. He's the author of the book Margin of Victory, 5 Battles That Changed the Face of Modern War. Colonel McGregor, thanks for coming on.
Sure.
What does this mean, and where's it going from here?
Look, this is a very curious case. I haven't figured out how we benefit from decertifying the Iranian agreement and then potentially sliding into a conflict with Iran. Because if we decertify Iran, the Senate will probably pass sanctions. Sanctions will be treated as an act of war by Iran. The Iranians will then say we have no further incentive to cooperate. They will double down on building nuclear warheads. They will probably get assistance this time from the Russians. We will inevitably collide with them militarily somewhere in the Gulf, in the Indian Ocean, or on the ground, where we have very light, vulnerable forces right now in Iraq. And Iraq is effectively an Iranian ally. It's a Shiite Arab state.
Right.
So you put all of this together and you have to ask yourself, what are we doing? How does this make sense? How do we benefit from this? Because we don't want a wider war. And clearly candidate Trump made it very clear that he did not want to widen any wars. He wanted to gradually disengage.
So what would be the point of this then? How did this happen?
I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense strategically. The timing is terrible. Our forces are spread very thinly around the globe. We have very light forces on the ground, entirely dependent upon air power for survival. If they are taken under direct assault by the Iranians, supported by the Russians, they're in a lot of trouble, and we would have a great deal of difficulty getting them out of there alive. We could easily be embarrassed, is the bottom line. It would take us a very long time to assemble any troops to go in there. And the notion that somehow or another with bombing or missiles we are going to subjugate Iran or bring it around is simple nonsense, because they will be backed by Russia. So those strategies have no chance of success. I wish, frankly speaking, that we would back away and rethink this whole thing, because I think the timing is terrible. This is not the time to do anything like this. And frankly, the Iranians are not going to renegotiate this thing. It took a long time to get it. Plus, our allies, our friends, everyone else in the world does not see Iran in the same light as we do in Washington, or as Israel does. They see the Sunni Arabs and the Sunni Turks, the Islamists in Ankara, the Islamists in Saudi Arabia and in the Middle East, as far, far more dangerous and hostile to Christians and Jews in the West than Iran.
Yeah, well, look at the body count. It proves that point.
Yes.
Colonel, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Harvey Weinstein wants to assure you that he is the victim here. Not evil, he's sick. And that should make you feel bad for him. He's now at a luxury rehab facility. Is it legitimate or a standard Hollywood ploy to divert attention? We'll talk to a psychotherapist about all of that coming up. Shortly after his misdeeds were exposed, Harvey Weinstein played the favorite card of every cornered celebrity. He's not depraved, he's sick. He's the real victim here. Well, some Americans actually struggle with real diseases, diabetes, arthritis, cancer. Weinstein struggled with an ailment that had made him sexually harass or assault almost every woman in sight. And like countless other famous people, Weinstein says he's getting that illness treated, the help he needs. He's reportedly entered a $2,000 per night rehab clinic in Arizona to treat what he says is sex addiction. Will he emerge a new man? Would you let him babysit after? Nell Gibbon-Daly is a psychotherapist. She joins us tonight. Nell, thanks a lot for coming on.
Hi. Thank you, Tucker. Thanks for having me.
So if you could just clarify the difference between a sex addict and a sexual predator, and why is Harvey Weinstein an addict, not a predator?
Well, a sexual addict would be someone who uses sex a lot to get comfort, right? They have an addiction to, let's say, pornography or looking at certain images. Someone who's a sexual perpetrator actually acts upon their sexual fantasies and breaks the law.
Well, that seems like a great distinction. I mean, I agree with you. So why is he in rehab, since he's clearly in the latter category?
Well, that was the choice that he made, right? He said that what he was going to do to repent for the things that he has done is to go to rehab. The question is whether or not he will turn himself in. Some people in my community, some feminists are coming out and saying, why wouldn't he actually, like thieves who steal cars and turn themselves in, if you admit to having committed these crimes, should you face jail time in the legal system?
So you said in order to repent, so it's kind of like buying an indulgence from the medieval church, like all is forgiven once you pay $2,000 a night to go to Santa Monica to talk about your problems in group therapy. I mean, that's kind of what it sounds like.
You know, what are his options at this point? You know, if he said that he wasn't going to go into therapy, how would he look in terms of the media? The problem is, and the really interesting question here is that with men, social shame doesn't stop them from committing this crime, right? We look at people like Bill Cosby, Bill Clinton, we look at, you know, O'Reilly, and now we have Harvey Weinstein. That's the fascinating question to me all of the time. Like, how is it that they're able to commit these crimes without thinking that there's going to be some like moral and huge social implications, considering the fact that they're men with so much power and they have so much visible exposure? Right.
Well, these are powerful drives. I mean, that's a fair point. I guess what bothers me about it, there are two things that bother me. One, it's so transparently phony. It's not a disease. The guy acted like a jerk, and maybe criminally in some ways, and it degrades the idea of mental health treatment. I think it's not a serious use of a mental health facility. It's using it as a public relations shield. Does that bother you?
I mean, whether he's using it as a public relations shield, yes. But I would have to disagree with you. In my community, there has been some success with people who are sexual predators. I'm going to call him a sexual predator. In terms of rehabilitating them, it's much easier to treat somebody who has committed this crime once, though, than someone who has done this over years and years of time.
Right.
So what we have to do is, because we can't lock these people up for life. In fact, in a lot of cases, we can't lock them up at all. Look at the case of Bill Cosby. What do we do when they reemerge back into the community? And the thing that we have to worry about is protecting other people in the community. I'm not saying I necessarily know whether Harvey Weinstein is going to commit this crime again, but he's certainly at risk for doing so.
So I guess the other thing that bothers me is the self-involvement of it all. All of his statements refer primarily to himself. And going to a place where you pay $2,000 to talk more about yourself seems like pouring kerosene on a campfire. Maybe he should be paying to go to a facility where he talks about other people's problems. I mean, do you see why self-involvement drives this kind of behavior? It's all about me and my needs and what I care about. And he convinced himself women wanted to watch him take a shower. I mean, this is a very self-involved guy.
Right. But therapy is what the therapy would do and what therapists would do in this kind of facility, whether that's, again, inside the prison system or outside the prison system, is that they would work on his grandiose ideas of himself. They would work on the very core things that he feels about women. They would challenge that. They would ask him to be more empathetic towards women. There's many things that in therapy they would do to try to deconstruct why he did what he did.
No, I get it, and I know that that's very common, but as you just conceded, it doesn't work very often, and maybe the whole premise is wrong. Maybe you should stop talking about yourself so much. All these people talk about themselves endlessly. Maybe they should stop. Do you think that would help?
What's his other option?
Talk about other people.
I think
listen to other people for once.
Look, well, maybe what is going to happen after he comes out of this entire situation is that he's going to hopefully give back to the community, open his checkbook, and support a lot of causes that would benefit women.
Nell, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me on, Tucker. I appreciate it.
Up next, exhaustive archival research has produced new scholarship about the modern world's preeminent philosopher. That would be Chris Cuomo. We've got it for you coming up. We want to dig a little deeper tonight into our vast Chris Cuomo archive to bring you tape from this summer when, for a brief moment, CNN's poet laureate and morning show host tried his hand at movie criticism. Watch this.
Wonder Woman, amazing. You finally had a female director break the $100 million mark. The film means more than just its box score. What does it mean to you? Here's a little intrigue. I wanted to be like Wonder Woman, and I'm going to wear a shirt that says it.
Now, to the conventional Western mind, trained in the Aristotelian tradition of rigorous textual analysis, a number of questions arise from what you just saw. What does it qualify as intrigue that Chris Cuomo once wanted to be Wonder Woman? Did he ever wear that shirt? What's with the air kisses? So many more questions. And yet it would be a mistake to approach a Chris Cuomo video in this way, bound by the fetters of logic and English grammar. Better to understand Chris Cuomo for who he is, an artist, a poet, a seeker, a shaman. The question is not, what the hell is Chris Cuomo talking about? The question is, what is Chris Cuomo trying to teach us, all of us, humanity itself? We can't answer that question. We're not Chris Cuomo. And so in the coming days, we'll bring you more of Chris Cuomo, much more, until we reach enlightenment or run out of videos, whichever comes first. So you've got that to look forward to. That's it for us tonight. Tune in every night at 8 to the show that's the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. Have the best weekend. Good night from Washington. Sean Hannity from New York. Next.